Okay, you guys voted and it wasn't even close. I guess it's time to talk about the best SMGs in Fortnite Save the World. And of course, it would not be a good way to start this video for me to not mention why we're making this. So, of course, I covered this video, oh my god, almost a year ago now. It was over a year ago, actually. And a couple of things have changed. First and foremost, there are weapons like the pepper sprayer, which exist now, which didn't previously. And a couple of changes have occurred. Now, you might notice that the SMGs are actually among the smallest group of weapons in the entire game. Don't quote me on this, I have not checked my words before speaking them, but I'm pretty sure there are less SMGs than there are traps in the game. However, the SMGs are pretty well known to be some of the best weapons in the entire game, and we will be getting into all of them right away. And I also want to say right away that as of my Vindertech Blazer video going out, I have covered every single SMG in the game on my channel. The best perks for all of these weapons will be linked down below. Even if you're not interested in the best perks for those weapons, it's still going to cover, like, you know, how they perform, what they look like. You can see some gameplay that I might not show in today's video, so I still think it's worth checking out if you're interested. Now, of course, as you can see here, the Founder's Quickshot and Thrasher are very similar weapons. We'll get into that later. They have gotten a serious buff. The Riptide is up there just alongside it, as it is the scavenger version of the Thrasher, and the Lightning Pistol has more or less come into play, even though it was already a pretty strong weapon. So let's get into some of these best weapons, and honestly, I think the best way for us to start is just alphabetically. So we're going from the top down here, and I'm going to go through them as we see. So, the Blastotron Mini. This is a weapon that I kind of did dirty in the fact that I didn't really put it in my new top 10 list, and that was frankly a mistake. I actually corrected this in the pin comment, and it was less of a mistake than it was an oversight. Like, this weapon definitely deserves to be considered one of the best weapons in the entire game. I think it's very, very tied with the Ratatat, which basically puts it in like the number 2 slot, and that's kind of iffy. It's not 100% certain because the Ratatat was up there for a couple of reasons. This is definitely a top 10 weapon, and I would put it in like the number 7 slot all around because it's just a phenomenal weapon. I don't know what else to say. It's a slow firing, high damage SMG with a really nice accuracy, and if you somehow haven't tried this weapon, I definitely recommend giving it a go because you will definitely enjoy it. Now, the Bobcat is a product of me being a little older and a little wiser than I used to be, because there was a lot of controversy between the Bobcat and the Silent Specter. Many people thought that these were like neck and neck as some of the best weapons in the game, and I have since done some math, and even though this DPS here will deceive you, it is not strictly more damage than the Silent Specter. The crit damage actually wins out quite a lot here. That's why the DPS is higher on sheet, and there are different ways to perk it, and I've even compared like crit rating, double crit damage, no reload perk, you know, slowed and stared bonus and everything, and it is not actually that strong compared to the Silent Specter. It's actually quite a bit lower in overall damage, but I think a lot of people knew this. What the Bobcat wins over is the fact that it has quite a bit higher mag size than most weapons. See, the Silent Specter actually needs a mag size perk to even compete. 50 base magazine size is really, really nice, and most SMGs have about 30 to 35-ish. So that is a really, really nice amount of mag size, and it does have a very slow reload, so you're going to need a reload perk on this weapon, but with a reload perk, the Bobcat is actually just, again, one of the better weapons in the game. I don't think it's as amazing as the Silent Specter. I don't think it really compares like everybody used to think it did. So while I don't think this is like a top 10 weapon in the entire game, it is definitely a solid SMG. The Dirge Song is going to be one of our first letdowns of the video. Unfortunately, as with some of the black metal weapons, it is really weird. I'm surprised that it's even classed as a pistol because it's more of like a burst pistol, but it's a 9-round burst weapon. So it's kind of like a weak bundle bus with really bad damage drop off, and there is a redeeming 6 perk which can give it extra damage against nature enemies, and that would definitely help if you're fighting nature enemies. And then you can even swap up that bottom 5th perk to like a reload perk, which would be nice, but 1.8 is already very good. So it's kind of a quirky weapon, and again, that's where the video down below will get way more to detail than I will today. I'm just going to say for today's purposes that it is kind of a weapon that you can comfortably forget, even if it is pretty interesting. Alright, thanks to the alphabet, we'll be getting to the Quickshot and the Thrasher very early on in the video. So the Quickshot and the Thrasher are pretty basically the best SMGs in the entire game. I'm not really going to try to dance around that at all. I have mentioned, like in the past, I've ranked like the Ratatat and the Hemlock higher, but those are for very specific circumstances. The Ratatat has a stacking damage and stacking crit rating perk that can really bring it ahead because of its perk choices, and we'll get into that in the Hemlock in a second. But I think, you know, just basic weapon damage, meaning there's no funny business, you don't need to ramp up your damage, just right out of the gate, the Quickshot is the best SMG in the entire game. It's just, you know, It is what it is. And you can see based on the perks here, they are effectively identical. What the Quickshot has going for it is one more crit damage perk. That's why the numbers are a little bit different up here. You see it has a higher crit damage, and it has a different 6 perk, which definitely matters. Not only does it buff its damage while you're shooting, but your reload speed. Meaning if you empty out your mag size in a full spray and you're not really stopping for anything, when you reload, you're going to reload so quickly that sometimes that bonus can still be active. So this has a huge damage buff on top of an extra crit damage perk, which gives it a little bit of an edge over the Thrasher. So if you have the Founder's Quickshot, it is basically a direct upgrade of the Thrasher. Other than you will be missing out on affliction damage, which seems to be a reoccurring bug, that the affliction bonus is doing quite a bit more damage than Epic seems to intend. And if that ever becomes permanent, I do personally think affliction is a little bit more fun to play with, but raw damage output is definitely just in the Quickshot's favor. So I'm not going to get too far into these weapons, even though this is the best SMGs video and this is the best SMG. But yeah, these weapons, in my opinion, kind of speak for themselves. They are essentially the golden standard. The Hemlock is interesting because on its, you see I have many copies of the Hemlock because the 6 perks just keep changing around. Back in the day, I used to have the each shot grants shield, and that was definitely great. Then they added Blast from the Past, and then I swapped all 4 of my schematics to Snare. Then they added the Shrapnel 6 perk, and that was kind of cool. And I didn't really go for it, but I did find myself with a copy of one, so I leveled it up because why not? And then I used a core reperk to get the landing 5 hits in a row, because that is what makes this weapon interesting. You see, the Hemlock is a very strong weapon. I'm not going to downplay it at all. This is seriously a top contender, a heavy swinging weapon, but it is a little bit boosted by that 5 hits in a row, because if you take 70%, divide that by 5, I believe it's a 14% damage buff, which in general isn't really much of a bonus. If you're just shooting normal enemies, most of them are dead before that first 5 shots anyway, because, you know, it's the Hemlock. But if you're shooting against a fat enemy or a mist monster or a mini boss or a, you know, a smasher especially, those are the enemies that are definitely going to take a lot more than 5 hits. And that 70% bonus damage on top of it essentially gives the Hemlock an all-around 14% damage buff. And on top of that, it'll be hitting the enemies around the target that you're shooting at, which can make it a lot better even yet. And with that bonus, it actually edges out the Thrasher DPS-wise. Now, that's just damage per second. These are just on-paper numbers. But when you're using that 5 hits in a row, it definitely makes the Hemlock, well, quite a bit better. Now, the Lightning Pistol is inappropriately named Lightning Pistol, seeing as it has now been changed to an SMG. This isn't exactly new news, but what is interesting about this weapon is you'll note the exact same perks it has as my Thrasher, and the fact that it has a higher DPS. Now, I don't always call to this DPS number. This is not how I rank my weapons, but when weapons have the exact same perks on them, you can actually use that. You can actually use that number fairly consistently, and you'll note that it's just a little bit higher than the Thrasher, and that is not a mistake. The weapon is stronger than the Thrasher. However, anybody who knows anything about vacuum tube weapons will know that this weapon is locked to nature, and that is why I say that the Thrasher is just better. Technically speaking, if you are going against, you know, neutral physical enemies or water enemies, the Lightning Pistol can be better, but it's throttled by 2 things. It'll do less damage against nature and fire enemies than the Thrasher would, but it's also, well, shooting energy cells. And I know that that's not exactly fair. Some people don't care. I am one of those people who doesn't care, but it's kind of impossible to ignore the fact that the Lightning Pistol is strictly more expensive of a weapon. Damage-wise, it can be better than the Thrasher, but you will be chewing through a ton of energy cells. So I've never really hailed this as the best SMG in the game, but it's definitely not one that you want to forget about. Not to mention, it also has a fancy 6 perk where you can, you know, chain to other enemies, and that is really cool. I love that all of the vacuum tube weapons have this, but if you do have this eliminating an enemy causes chain lightning 6 perk, it'll, you know, have a better, you know, crowd effect, but you will lose that 45% damage to afflicted, and that will definitely hurt your bottom line damage wise. So it can be a very fun weapon. I really don't want to downplay that at all. The Monsoon is a weapon I'm going to be a little quick about, but it's basically a pocket minigun. It doesn't really compare well damage per second wise because you have to spin up because it's very much so like a minigun. And you can see that I have a fire rate perk on this, and this gets to a whopping 23 shots per second. That is huge. This weapon is really fun when it gets going. It doesn't perform normally enough for me to compare it, so I will say that this weapon is on its own a really cool weapon, and definitely something where I need to recommend the video down below once again, because it's just not a weapon that I have enough time to get into today. Suffice it to say that when you get spun up, this weapon is really powerful and really fun. The Papa Bear is a brand new addition, kinda, to this video. So this is a weapon that kinda didn't exist before I made this video. It was added after my previous video, kinda, because, I keep saying kinda, because it is, well, essentially a clone of the Typewriter. I have very different perks on these because I was screwing around with a double fire rate build, which, interestingly enough, is technically higher DPS than what's over here, but because it's double fire rate, you're gonna be chewing through all your ammo instantly, and it's just never recommended. But my point is, it's basically the same as the Typewriter. The Typewriter is a very good-ish, B tier weapon. It's nothing exceptional. It's not a hugely, insanely good weapon or anything. It's not a sleeper pick, but it is a weapon that you could pull out one day, not having used it in a long time, and wonder to yourself, why does nobody talk about this weapon? So I definitely, if you have the Papa Bear, I have not put this in the collection book for a reason, because it's actually kind of good, and I definitely enjoy using it sometimes. Not to mention the Typewriter is an exceedingly rare weapon, as they just refuse to release it back to the shop, so a lot of people have actually used weapon vouchers on the Typewriter, and while I don't necessarily suggest that, I think there are better weapons to spend your vouchers on. Link to that video down below. The Papa Bear and the Typewriter are definitely good weapons if you're looking to have a little bit of fun. The Ratatat. I said we'd talk about it, and here we are. So I have triple crit damage on this because I was screwing around with Totally Rocking Out on stream. You can tell a lot of these weapons that I don't use often because my perks are still weird, but I mentioned this weapon can be better than the Thrasher. So it is definitely a good weapon. It's a weapon that's been good for a very long time. It compares really, really well to some of the top SMGs in the entire game, and the difference is this new each shot grants damage or crit rating can be very, very effective. And if you run like a normal, I believe you put a crit rating perk on this, and you have that stacking, if I can find it, and if you have that stacking crit rating perk, it can be a lot more damage than the other SMGs, exceeding that 300,000 DPS mark. I mentioned that in the AR video, where I am really not sharing a lot of numbers. I do use a calculator for a lot of my numbers here, and when I compare these weapons, it's not really an opinion, but I just want to say that the Thrasher, my golden example, is about 244,000 DPS. The Lightning Pistol with the right element is around about 250, 260,000 DPS, and the Silent Specter, which many of you are probably very familiar with, is around about 230k. Well, the Ratatat can get up to 330,000 DPS, which, again, if this is just a lot of numbers, this is why I don't share them. That might be confusing to some of you. My point is, this weapon can be very, very strong about 15 shots in. So you have to ramp up that damage every single time, which isn't exactly practical. So it's technically capable of being the strongest SMG in the entire game, hands down, but you kind of have to set yourself up for that, and it's not going to always be active. It's kind of like how Totally Rocking Out is the highest DPS you can reach, but you need to actually activate that team perk in order to benefit from that. So it's a tricky, tricky weapon to understand. However, the Ratatat is definitely not to be ignored if you want to get into it. I did forget to mention the Riptide earlier, but it's basically the Thrasher. It has literally the only difference is it's a scavenger weapon, and it's slightly cheaper. It has a weirdly higher impact, which is so negligible it's not worth mentioning. And it has a base 30 damage rather than 31. So it's around about 3% weaker than the Thrasher, but a lot more efficient. So if you want the power of the Thrasher, but you're on a little bit of a budget, the Riptide is a perfectly capable weapon. The Silent Specter does not need much more attention. I think everybody knows that this weapon is a beast. It is essentially everything great about the Thrasher, except that it's about 7.3% weaker. This DPS number here is to be ignored because crits work a little bit differently on these weapons. However, the Silent Specter is just a fan favorite for a long time. It was the best SMG for a very long time. It has mathematically been dethroned by the Thrasher, but it is still phenomenal. I pull out the Silent Specter myself almost every other stream. It's a very fun weapon, and I don't want to downplay it at all. A lot of people were messaging me that they were recycling their Specter once I made my video on the Thrasher, and I was like, stop it, stop it. This weapon is still amazing. If you have a copy, please keep using it. But it's not a new enough weapon for me to waste too much of today's video on. I did make an updated video on the Specter, so if you want to get all of the news about this weapon since its most recent change, link to that below, of course. The Pepper Sprayer is the new addition to this video, alongside the Trinity, no doubt, and it is really interesting. So damage-wise, since I gave you some numbers earlier, I will mention that if the Thrasher is about 244 DPS, 244,000, the Specter's around about 230, the Pepper Sprayer is about 187,000 DPS. Now, that is a shockingly lower number. It is strictly weaker, and I'm talking crit rating, double crit damage, affliction bonus, and everything this weapon underperforms. But it has two very big things going for it. First and foremost is the reload speed of 1.5, and the second one is the range. Now, the range is kind of a two-parter, meaning it has the range and the accuracy to be kind of like an assault rifle. Like, it has a really good long-range attack, and having a base 34 mag size on top of that is, a little bit more more than 30, as you will, and it is really nice. It has that 9.9 base fire rate, and the base stats on this weapon are just insanely good. So you can do a total crit build plus affliction or whatever, slowed and snare, whatever you got going on, and you can definitely make this weapon just all damage and not even worry about it. So yes, its damage is quite a bit lower than the other SMGs, but its range and accuracy makes it a super easy, super fun weapon to use, and with a 1.5 reload speed, you won't be out of the fight for very long. So this is just a weapon that reminds everybody watching that damage isn't everything. And the Trinity is... I am so disappointed in the Trinity. I'm not going to try to hype this weapon up. It has a really interesting way that it runs. So it fires in 4-round bursts, but in my experience, sometimes it was firing in 3-round bursts, and it is a good weapon. I'm not going to, I'm not going to knock it at all, but it has a very hard accuracy to control. It's firing in a burst, and if you move at all, you might not hit all your shots, and I have personally never been able to make the Trinity work, but I can't ignore its existence. It is definitely a fun weapon, and I recommend you trying it out yourself. Don't necessarily take my word for it. If you have a copy of the Trinity and you were one of those lucky few, go ahead, power it up and give it a go, but you might be disappointed. Now, the Blazer is the weapon that actually delayed the upload of this video because I went to record this and was like, wait a minute, I forgot to cover the Blazer, and it's, well, not, it's good. It's definitely better than people, give it credit for. It's a weapon that often gets forgotten, but it's not so good that I'm going to justify using a bunch of energy cells to use it, and that's kind of where this weapon rests. It's a burst, base game, technically event, Vindertech weapon, and it's not, a very rare weapon. It's available in the mission alerts constantly. I cover them every day on my channel, subscribe for more. But it's, yeah, not exactly. It's more of like a B or a C tier weapon. It's not anything to be writing home about. Now, the Viper is a weapon that I always feel a little bit bad about because in my original Best SMGs video, I actually noted that the Thrasher and the Riptide had some serious potential to be the best SMGs in the game, and look at where we are today. The Viper, unfortunately, did not get very similar treatment. It was unchanged with the update that made those weapons so great, and it's good, but it has a really low accuracy, super high fire rate at 13.5, which is faster than most SMGs in the game, but it's kind of a bullet hose. You're going to be shooting a lot of shots, doing not that many damage per bullet, and good luck hitting all your shots because the accuracy is also kind of holding it back. And believe it or not, that sums it up for every SMG in the game. I know, I told you, there weren't that many to talk about, but as you can see, with the power of SMGs, I've got 6 Hemlocks over here, 6 Pepper Sprayers, 5 Silent Specters, and that's not me flexing, that's me saying these weapons are so good they're worth powering up more than once. I have them for different elements, different 6 perks. I like to use them in all of the different situations that make them good. I didn't even mention the Pepper Sprayer has that standing in place bonus, which can make it kind of interesting. So the SMGs might be a small group of weapons, but they are loud and proud and very diverse, so they are very, very interesting and among my favorite weapons in the entire game. Thank you guys so much for watching. These videos do take quite a bit of extra work, so if you guys want to use my code in the item shop, I really do appreciate it. It helps support me. Subscribe to the channel if you made it this far. I really do appreciate it. Follow my Twitch, link in the description below, where I test a lot of these weapons. Become a channel member here if you guys want to support me even further. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then